off, Seth, before we even get started, I know you don't need an introduction, but I have to introduce you because I have such a deep crush on you and have had such a deep crush on you for so long. So for those of you who don't know Seth, which is impossible if you're on this series, Seth is just a legend. He's somebody who is at the intersection of all things I love: learning, being a creator, and telling stories and marketing. And so, when I think about who has inspired us the most for building this incredibly fun and entertaining disco platform that we are building, Seth totally comes to mind. Seth was the pioneer of the altMBA, which was really one of the first cohort-based courses that was online, and also the founder of Akimbo. I know you are now cheering them on from the side, and I always get the number wrong because there's so many books that Seth has written. I think it's something like 80 books and 20 bestsellers. And not only that, he has written 7,500 blog posts and graced the TED stage too many times to count. So when I think about, for creators, who we should listen to around how to think about building really transformative learning experiences, you're the guy, Seth. So here we go.
Well, thank you. You're making me blush. Let's get to it because that's better.
Okay, let's do it. So first off, do you know what disco means?
Do I know what disco means?
Yes.
I thought I did, but why don't you tell me? Oh, yes, you told me this is like from the ancient Greek or Roman or something.
That's right. We decided to skip the whole industrial age and sort of go back to what we actually think learning is, which is very different, and we're going to get there. But it really is the Latin word for learn. So along with the fun music, we're super excited to have a name now that is actually at the core of what we're doing. And maybe let's start there, which is, you talk a lot about the difference between education and learning. Tell us, what do you mean by that?
So this is critical, and we're gonna have to come back to this over and over again, because many of the people who are tuning in want to make a living doing this, want to build something that actually engages with audiences and leads to commerce. And we are now living in an age where people want education because that's what we got brainwashed into. And education is compliance. Education is conforming. Education, you can tell it's there if someone says, will this be on the test? And in exchange for the test, we get a piece of paper. Mm-hmm. And you don't remember anything you learned in 10th grade or your sophomore year of college. You just know that you got the paper when you were done. That's education. There's this second category, I'll call it entertainment, which is, some famous playwright making a 3-hour video that you can watch pretending that that's going to make you a famous playwright. I'm not buying it. And then there's the third thing, which is learning. And you know how to ride a bike, and you know how to use a yo-yo, and you know how to juggle, and you know how to speak, and you know how to shake hands with someone. You didn't learn any of those things in school, and there was no test. So the things that make us us are things we learned, not things we were educated into. That's how I divide them into 3 categories. And I believe in online learning to my bones, and I have no patience, not much patience for online education, except if we can figure out how to make it free and widespread for people who have been left behind. But for everybody else, for advanced stuff, count me in for learning, not so much for education.
I love that. I think it's so important to focus on this very topic, which once you said it, I just couldn't stop thinking about it, is enrollment, right? And that idea that this is voluntary. And so, when you think about this concept of enrollment, for every creator who's on this, call with us, they are thinking about, how do I create an enrolling experience? So, I know you've thought a lot about this. What is the formula that you need to think about to actually get people to want to do something?
Right. So let's talk about enrollment, because it means 2 completely different things. In mandatory education, enrollment is required. You get in trouble if you don't send your kid to school. that kind of enrollment is a hallmark of education, but I don't think it should be called enrollment because that's not really what the word means. In learning, it means I am eager to experience discomfort on my way to get better at something. And so you can't force someone to learn yoga or how to juggle against their will. They will only learn it if they want to learn it. And put a big circle around this, you'll be bad at it until you're good at it. And that moment of being bad at it is where enrollment becomes critical. So the way it works in some is you've told all your friends, you've gone $50,000 in debt. If you drop out, you'll be in trouble. So therefore you are at some level emotionally enrolled. You will pull an all-nighter to get through it. But what the internet opens up for us is the other kind of enrollment, which is the eager student. And the eager student says, I know this is going to be hard. Please don't tell me the fast and easy way, because it's not fast and it's not easy. Please help me experience things so that on the other side, I come out transformed. And, so when I invented the altMBA, the original model of massive online courses had a 97% dropout rate. So the breakthrough class on artificial intelligence, 100,000 people took it and 3,000 people finished it. Why? Because it's hard to learn artificial intelligence. And as soon as it gets hard, that's the learning. People dropped out because it wasn't enrollment. There wasn't enough at stake.
Right.
Well, the altMBA, which still runs, you go to altMBA.com. The altMBA has a 97% completion rate and a 3% dropout rate, because the only people who are in it have committed emotionally to the journey. And so the very thing that creators do to get people through the course, which is more videos, more videos, more videos, diminishes learning, diminishes enrollment. It's just entertainment. And so if you look at the stats of, the Udemy's and the masterclasses, et cetera, there's this huge drop off, because as soon as it's not funny, and as soon as it's not easy, people are like, oh, I'll go watch YouTube instead. And I am much more focused on how do I create a platform, a foundation where people choose to do the hard thing so that they can be transformed. That's enrollment.
I love it. I mean, we've talked about this. That very notion is exactly why we are building Disco. Is, we saw that it's super hard for people and creators now, it's super hard for creators to, one, actually stand out in a sea of all that abundant content. And it's not delivering results. And so I think what you say is so interesting when you talk about emotional enrollment. And one of the points that you talk about is the notion of pricing as a way to create emotional enrollment. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Okay, so money is a story. It's not real. It's all made up. We think that loonie is worth something because that coin can be traded for a Jersey milk bar, not because the coin itself has any intrinsic value. And part of the problem with the story of money is lots of people tell themselves the story differently. And so when we look at pricing, it has two effects. One is it gives us the revenue to do our work, but the second is it sends a signal to people. So this is going to be a challenge in the online world for a long time to come, because if you say it costs $10 a month for each person to use Slack, for some people, $10 a month is too much. And for some people, $10 a month doesn't count. Then there's this band in between where it's just the right amount to get people to care and to take it seriously. So when we think about selling access to a course, well, the way it works at Harvard is each individual course doesn't cost you anything extra. It's included in your tuition. And people become enrolled because they're trading it for a grade and the status that comes with. If you are a creator looking for a platform where you don't have to get people to sign up, well, I don't think that's Disco. I haven't looked at your business model, but there are other ones that are like this flat fee. But what I discovered, I was the #1 instructor on Skillshare for a while, and you had to pay to take a Skillshare workshop, and completion was very high. And then they switched to flat rate pricing, and a lot more people started and very few people finished. The workshop was exactly the same. What had changed was, what did you feel like you had at stake? So I believe that going forward, one of the things we're going to have is tuition. You have to pay to use this. But I think it's more likely that other forms of status and tribal connection are going to kick in so that you feel like you will be letting down a circle of people if you don't show up. And that thing of being missed if you're gone is so important to what we're trying to build.
Absolutely. Seth, that brings me to, we nearly missed you this morning. So let's talk about that.
Well, I don't know. You're the king of segues, so you're gonna figure out how to talk about my canoe in the Hudson River. I don't know how to bring that into the conversation.
Okay, so I'm going to bring this into the conversation as the very thing that actually how I found out about you is a really amazing learning experience that my children go to, which is a camp in the middle of Algonquin Park. And all plastered all over the cabins and the walls are pictures of Seth Godin. And I remember seeing this, thinking, who is this guy that this camp thinks so highly of? And it turns out he's the guy who went there, he's an alumni, but who actually really helped kids learn how to canoe. And so the segue may be a little convoluted, but it's really interesting to me around your view on project-based learning and, quite frankly, the notion of community as elements of enrollment.
Right. Okay, so first, my picture isn't anywhere on any of the cabins. On the other hand, this would have been my 43rd summer up there. I have missed almost none. Everything that I am at some level is a result of where I learned to teach, and that's where I learned to teach. And what I teach was invented by the late Omer Stringer in the 1920s. Omer taught Chuck, and Chuck taught me. So I am trying to maintain this legacy. And what we teach is taking a 16-foot wooden canoe, getting in it by yourself, which you're not supposed to do, facing the wrong direction, sort of in the middle, and leaning it all the way over till it almost tips. And then you're able to paddle and do spins and tricks and things. And if you type Omer Stringer and my name into Google, you can see a video of me talking about it. Anyway, why is it important? It's important because if you say to a 12-year-old who has been handed too many privileges their whole life, but never responsibility, if you say to a 12-year-old, this boat that's bigger than you, you're afraid of it, you can get in it and make it do what you want it to do, it's your turn, you can see the fear in their eyes and you can see the moment. And if they enroll in the journey, 2 hours later, I will be able to help that person sit up straight, learn to breathe, control this thing, and move it under their own power to a place. And it changes people's lives. And I've been trying to recreate that feeling in lots of places ever since 1976. And why do kids keep doing it, even though it's physically tiring, it's windy, and you might get wet? And the reason is because their friends are watching, because they're in community, because status will accrue to somebody who gets to the other side. That the purpose of community is not to create shame around losing the baseball game. The purpose of community is to create possibility when we confront the things that we are afraid of. And so if you want to understand why Silicon Valley works, and you are the expert of this, you know, if someone could ever hire you to fund their company, they should. Silicon Valley works because you're surrounded by people who get the joke. And it doesn't work because sometimes the joke they tell is a horrible one that strips people of their dignity and spies on them. But that's an artifact of the same thing, which is, what does this community measure? What do they keep track of? What does it mean to be in the community? And so if you're a creator and you want to go build a Udemy course, please do. I have Udemy courses. You get to keep 97% of the money. It's pretty straightforward. But it's not learning the way learning can be online, because learning online is not, how do I get someone to pay the tuition? It's, how do I create a community so that there's social pressure and status rewards and affiliation for people who enroll?
I love it. It's so core to what we are trying to help creators do and why we're doing what we're doing. And so let's dive in. Like, you've talked about a couple things, and I know people on this call have lots of questions, so feel free to ask questions too. But let's kind of actually get into some of the tactics. You talk a lot about how to think about setting up now a curriculum or an experience to get somebody from point A to point B. I think it's great we'll dive deeper into cohorts in a second, but just in the notion of, for creators who are thinking about putting together a cohort-based course, what should they be thinking about? One prompt for you, because I know you like prompts, is this idea of learning to see.
Right.
Can you talk about what should we be thinking about when you're starting out to put this together?
Okay, so the first thing is there's no shortage of information. For free, you can look up how to do anything. You might even be able to find a video showing you how to do that. You do not, there's nobody on this call who knows how to do something that nobody else knows how to do. That's a secret, right? Like maybe you know the secret password for Tau Beta Pi, or that you're a member of the Shriners. But other than that, there are very few secrets involved here. So what is the trajectory? Number one, people need to feel like they're in the cohort. It begins by having people talk about things they are safe talking about and being heard and seeing it reflected back to them. So at the beginning, we're not teaching you facts. We're just teaching you are part of this. And that goes back and forth. And inside Akimbo workshops, that changes so many things. In that first 3 days, what book do you recommend to other people? What caused you to decide to go on this? Something where you're the authority on it, and suddenly connection gets made. The second thing is we become what we do. And what that means is do things, and then suddenly you are that thing, right? That if you want to be a writer, you have to write. And once you write a little and write a little and write a little, then the practice, thank you, kicks in and it becomes identity. And then the third piece, before we can even get to, I'm going to teach you some facts now, is do you see what I see? Do you see that this kind of company gets funded and this one doesn't? Do you see that this kind of record album sells and this one doesn't? Do you see that this person is succeeding in that one? If I can help you see what I see, and you're enrolled in the journey and you're part of the cohort, then you will say, okay, how do I see that more? You will say, how do I go to the next level? And at that point, I can stop pushing you. And at that point, I don't need any tests or prizes, because you're curious, I'm curious, and I can show you a path. And when in doubt, over and over again, Wizard of Oz, 1939. Just go watch The Wizard of Oz, right? The story starts with this person from out of town coming down and killing a woman and then eventually killing herself. That's not really what it's about, right? What it's about is a young woman who first ends up in a cohort. The first 10, 20 minutes of the movie are nothing about her joining a cohort. And then it becomes about her learning to see, relationships and only at the end does she discover that all along she had the ruby slippers. That's what we're doing here. It's all The Wizard of Oz.
We should have named our company Oz.
I think those 2-letter ones are probably taken, but and there are no flying monkeys in disco as far as I know.
No, not yet. That's true. But that is so profound in so many ways, right? Which is, number one, I just think this idea that doing stuff alone is really, really, it just doesn't work. It's not hard, and it's too hard. The piece that you sort of touched on, though, that I want to go a little bit deeper is this learning to see, because what you said is so true. It's like, you use some language that I just thought was so great, which is, ultimately what learning is shifting a mindset or an expectation. And, this idea that you are there to help people see things in a different way is really, really useful, I've found, as a course instructor. What do you suggest, though, in terms of using different tools to do that? So, I know you have some pretty good views on lectures, and I'll already create that. Let's not use them, is what you often say. But what else? Like, how do you, if you're not using lectures, how do you get people to see things?
Right. So to be fair, showing up on video, looking right in the camera and speaking clearly from authority there's a lot that can add value to. It's a form
Mm.
of appropriate reassurance. It transfers not just knowledge that could easily be in a document, but also the emotional commitment to that knowledge. But what I'm talking about with learning to see, let's pick physical things first. If you're a golf instructor and you can show me a 3-minute video of 3-second video of someone's swing, and then you can show me somebody else's swing, and you can show me what was different between the two of them, the next time I see someone swing, I will be able to see the difference. If you want to teach people kerning, and there's a great XKCD cartoon about this, you should look up XKCD kerning in Google. Once I show you what poorly kerned type looks like, you will never be able to unsee poorly kerned type. And it's a curse because it's everywhere, and now you're going to be annoyed, right? Or juggling, I teach juggling in the book, The Practice. Once you know how juggling works, you can tell the difference between a good juggler and a bad juggler in 3 seconds because you're going to look for the right thing. So part of what we're doing with learning to see is highlighting these. But then the second part is in community, in the cohort, without the lecturer, challenge people to talk to each other about what they see. Because if 5 people watch something or engage with something and they don't see the same thing, them talking to each other will help them all see more clearly.
I love that. So really it's about how do you get others involved in the learning process. So it's not just for you, the creator, to teach people to see. And, something you said that, you have this line, don't steal the revelation. Right. Tell us more. What do you mean by that? Like, how does that aid learning to see?
This is one of the altMBA coaches gave me this line. I honestly can't remember who it was. I am so grateful. What we do when we're giving a lecture is we steal the revelation. We say knock, knock, and then we say who's there. And then we say the interrupting cow. And then we say moo, 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 right? That's not funny. What makes it work is if the people can finish the synapses in their own head. Because in that moment, they are the author of the story, not you. So we establish the conditions for the revelation, and then we let the student discover the revelation. And if you discover a revelation, you will never forget it.
So true. So let's dive even deeper. One of the things that your pedagogy really encourages is this notion of obviously project-based. And so how do I actually think about this as a creator? Like, how do I manage these projects? Do you have any tips or sort of suggestions for thinking through the framework to manage a project that's self-directed?
Right. So I think we're trying to lead projects, not manage them. Managing projects means we know exactly how it's going to go, and people will do it because we told them to. Leading projects means we're not really sure, but we can establish the conditions. So this is art school. Art school is not, I will hold your hand while you draw a circle. It's come in tomorrow with something you drew. And we put them all up on the walls and we talk about them. You can't show up to class tomorrow without a drawing. And you learn to give and get feedback about drawings, which is why art school is so much more effective than, say, business school. Because in business school, we're not doing it. We're just hearing people go on about it, which doesn't help us do it. And so it's going to be different depending on what you're trying to teach. And, I'm looking at some of the questions coming in on the chat. And again, it's all going to come back to, did you promise something that was easy to sell? In which case you're going to have to give them videos and you're going to have a high dropout rate. Or did you promise people something that's hard to sell, but once they're in, they're not going to drop out and you're going to be able to change their lives. So, for example, there's a school in Maine where for a few $1,000s, you can go for 5 days and you leave with a wooden boat. And you can learn to make a wooden boat by watching videos at Cape Falcon Kayak. But if you go to Maine and build a wooden boat, now you're a wooden boat builder. Right. Well, way more people watch the videos about how to make a boat than actually go to Maine and build a boat. You got to decide which business you want to be in.
I think that is bang on for what we're talking about. I just, your comment earlier about your book, The Practice, is super relevant here. I was telling Seth, if you haven't read Seth's book called The Practice, is one of my favorite books you've written, because it's actually about having a practice. But it was interesting, your comment on not as many people may be interested, to actually do the work. And I think that's actually super important when it comes to marketing. And so you kind of hit on it. One of the biggest questions we get asked at Disco, and what we're trying to solve for as well, is how do you actually market cohort-based courses that are voluntary?
Right.
What advice do you have to our creators to think about marketing these types of transformative experiences?
I think there's a difference between infinity and sufficiency. And the internet tends to be about infinity. Google keeps growing. People amazingly still join Facebook. Infinity, we need all of it. Sufficiency is actually what you need. Sufficiency is 100 students would be enough. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to be really picky about who the 100 students are. That I'm going to be really clear that this isn't for everybody, but it might be for you. And one of the challenges of doing this for money or raising money from investors is they have an infinity mindset. You might have an infinity mindset if you're a course creator. And what I'm trying to pitch people on is sufficiency is the best way even to get to infinity. Because if you say it's enough, then you'll get there. When I first met Sergey Brin from Google, someone asked him there were like 8 of us in the room, why don't you promote Google more? This was a very long time ago. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, because every day Google gets better. And we figure sooner or later, everyone's going to use it. But the longer we wait before we tell them about it, the better their first experience is going to be.
Mm. Really helpful. So we have some amazing questions here, and I want to make sure we have time for those. And there's still so much I want to cover. But Kirsten, I know Kirsten asked us on Twitter already about this question and is so excited to be here. Her question is such a great one, which is, how do you build awareness and trust? If someone sees what you're doing, what will keep them from beating you at your own game? What a great question.
Right. 2 questions. Second question is easier. Tim O'Reilly famously said, the enemy is not piracy. The enemy is obscurity. I have been telling everyone as loudly as I can for 6 years exactly what I'm trying to do. How many people have stolen it? Not many. And when my friend Wes goes off to start Maven, or when my friend Candace shows up to start Disco, I'm like, great, I'll help. Let's go. Our problem is not stealing from each other. Our problem is that 99.99999% of the people on earth are not doing this. Mm-hmm. That's the goal. So you got no secrets. If you have a course that can be easily stolen and it doesn't matter if it's stolen, it's going to get stolen. So that means you have to build something where your presence in it and your point of view and your reputation means it's hard to steal, because protecting your ideas is not going to get you to where you want to go. Okay. The first part of your thing is attention and trust. And I've been ranting about this for a while. Most people who use social media have been tricked into thinking that their job is to get attention. No, that's just what Jack Dorsey wants you to do. That's what Mark Zuckerberg wants you to do. If you compromise who you are and what you stand for to get attention by putting on a display running down the street naked, you'll get attention. Why? We don't need more attention. We need more trust. And the way you get trust is by making promises and keeping them. You earn trust by showing up in places where people like us do things like this. So if you can build a workshop, don't do it online if you can find 10 vaccinated people. If you can build a workshop that changes the lives of 5 people, will they tell the others? And if they don't, then your workshop's not good enough. And if they do, then the trust will spread. So the shortcut isn't, how do I make my funnel big at the top? I was talking to a friend last night about this. He wants to teach something about real estate development. I said, to get 100 students for a course like that, you're going to need more than 1 million people to watch your video on YouTube. I said, you're not going to get 1 million people. You spend all your time hyping your video. The funnel's too steep. You need instead to say, if I could change 10 people, would they each tell 10 people?
So good. Like the notion of making sure your experience actually delivers. I mean, that's the theme that's coming through over and over again, and the amazing stuff that happens once that happens. I think we have an alpha council of creators, and we invite all the people here to participate, where we really talk through what are the biggest challenges. And clearly marketing is one of the biggest ones, and clearly referrals seem to be the answer to a lot of the really successful cohort-based course creators marketing. So I love that. Yan is one of our Alpha Council members, and he's awesome. He runs a community focused on virtual facilitation. And his question is, how do you make sure that participants don't drop off halfway? What can we as creators do when we notice someone not taking action?
Yeah, so this is something that I explored for years and years, and the folks at Akimbo keep getting better at. There are a whole bunch of approaches. If you think about Alcoholics Anonymous, first, in answer to your marketing question, have you noticed it's not anonymous? That even though they have no marketing budget, it's talked about all the time. Because one of the rules of Alcoholics Anonymous is you should talk about it. And the second thing is, if you don't show up in a meeting, your sponsor will call you and say, where were you? And this idea of creating learning groups who will miss people if they are gone, with creating rhythms and expectations, maybe that takes a lot more work at the beginning, but it dramatically increases the retention rate of the thing. And then part of my rant about Google is when people drop off, as the course creator, it's really hard to email them and say, where are you? Because they're just going to put it in the spam folder, right? Shame on Google. It's not spam, but there's not a lot of ways around it. One of the things that was effective was using Twilio to create SMS relationships with people. So if somebody is paying hundreds of dollars for a course, you can afford to send them a text every single time there's a new lesson. And the last part of this that I'll share is some people like to be at the front of the parade. And the idea that it dripped. So you only have an hour to be at the front of the parade because soon other people are going to get ahead of you, motivates some people. Other people like to be at the back of the parade. So if you create scarcity by saying the lesson number 7 is going to disappear in an hour, that's another crisis and someone's got to rush in and take advantage. So you're going to have to play with all of these things. We're inventing this. They've had thousands of years to build real life learning. We're all together trying to figure this part out.
Great suggestions, super good suggestions. We have a couple more questions. Alexandra says, hi Seth, I'm Alexandra, also a Tufts alum. I'm writing about mind switches in education. What would be your biggest advice to help people move towards a mind switch?
I'm looking at the word mind switch, and it's a fascinating one. Go Jumbos, by the way. Getting someone to change their mind is really, really hard. Creating the conditions where they can change their own mind is, it feels to me, the magic of this. So if you think about the funnel of Wikipedia, Wikipedia has more than 5 million people have made a small edit to Wikipedia, but only 1 out of 1,000 of them becomes a core contributor. All of Wikipedia is basically built by 5,000 people. What happens to go from the million to the 5,000? Somewhere along the way, you change who you are and you become a Wikipedian, because the act of making a small edit and getting feedback on that seduces you into making another edit and getting feedback on that. And then you start giving other people feedback on their edits. And the next thing you know, when you look in the mirror, the person you see is a Wikipedian. And that process is how we build culture.
Very useful. And maybe like the notion of culture in the context of these learning communities. You use that word, and I think it's really interesting as creators to think about culture. What advice do you have for how to set culture?
Right.
how to create culture. What is culture as part of a learning community?
Yes. Bing, bing, bing. You have to set culture. And that, for whatever reason, got abdicated on the internet a while ago. If you act like a troll inside an Akimbo workshop, you're not going to last 5 minutes before somebody corrects you, adjusts the way your thing appears, et cetera. It's just not tolerated. Not around here. We don't talk to each other that way. And when you start giving people feedback, there's an expectation about how feedback is given. And you never get to say, I don't like this and I don't like you. It's not an option. It's not the way this culture is built. And culture is a choice. We get what we tolerate. The fact is, for a long time, you couldn't talk loudly at the movies. Well, that's why. Because you can talk loudly at a jazz concert. Well, maybe, but you can definitely talk loudly at a rock concert. So you get to decide. You're the proprietor. Figure out what it's like around here.
So set culture, be super intentional about what's allowed, what's not allowed, who's there, who you want to be a part of this as well. I know we've thought a lot about that. And that's why applications, really matter, right? And how you create both the psychology, but actually who participates in your cohort, because this isn't just sage on stage. There's so many things I want to talk about, but we have such great questions. So this is truly for our community of creators, Seth, and there's some really good ones. This one is from, I actually don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right, so I apologize in advance if I mess it up, but it's Lashazar. And he has a really interesting question around VR and AR. What do you think about this? Is it going to change the e-learning space? I know at Disco, we are not integrating yet with AR, VR, but on a very distant future, that may be something we do. What do you think?
So you're talking to the person who thought the World Wide Web was stupid and it cost me $40 billion. So I am not the authority on this, but I will also tell you that in 1999, I wrote a book called Permission Marketing. And for 22 years, people have been saying, what's the next big thing? Is it AR? Is it VR? Is it this? Is it this? And for 22 years, I've said, the next big thing is the ability to talk to people who want to hear from you with anticipated, personal, and relevant messages that are engaging them in the culture. And if you had listened to me 15 years ago or 10 years ago or 5 years ago, think of what you would have built. Holding our breath for these new technologies that giant monopolists are going to try to use to extract money from us. We're due for a really big breakthrough. There will be almost no advantages that come from going first. The first iPad apps didn't pay off for anybody. Go down the list. Going first is not your friend. What's your friend is building community. Building community persists.
Great answer. One more question here, which I think is something that at Disco we care a lot about. Our view is that we're all in this together, and we actually want this collective community of creators and learners and pioneers, where our goal is to change an entire institutional education system. And our view is that happens on the edge, that happens with creators, and it happens with this community. So the goal is much bigger. And the question Cam asks is really dear to my heart, which is, how can course creators actually support each other? We need 100x the amount of online learners than there are today, according to Cam. A rising tide lifts all boats. What do you think about that? How do you suggest people help each other?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things. First of all, if you apply to Princeton, they don't pretend that Yale doesn't exist, right? In fact, they're all eagerly playing stupid games of football against each other. So there are other courses. People will find them. Pretending they don't exist isn't helping anybody. So the two things that I think would really help this community is, one, eagerly and regularly blurb other people's work. I've blurbed hundreds of books in my career. It's exhausting. It takes too much time. It's rarely satisfying, but I do it anyway because someone did it for me. And number two is start a mastermind group. You're all right here in the chat. Invite each other to a weekly Zoom call. Tell each other everything you know. Challenge each other to go to the next level. Don't be alone. but don't wait for someone to invite you to a mastermind. Go start one, because that idea that together we can do this, no one on this call is a competitor with anybody on this call. Our competitor is apathy.
Yeah. I love that. Seth, I'm super mindful and respectful of your time. I know we had 45 minutes with you, and I just really want to call out your generosity. You know, when you talk about that, you are one of the most generous humans, really, around your pedagogy, your inspiration, and just actually doing exactly what that question referenced, which is rising the tide lifts all boats. And you are at the epicenter of creating that tidal wave. So huge gratitude. And yes, Disco is all about bringing community together so that we can reimagine what the future of learning. And in our view, it is creator-led, with community, project-based. And we're so excited to kind of leave this industrial age behind and really, you know, have more of Seth in the world in many ways. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone. And thank you, Seth. You are a true inspiration. And we hope to have you back. And we hope everyone has a wonderful day. I will say just before you go, next week, we have a very dear friend of mine, Tarun Sekdeva. He was my co-creator at Wattpad. I was head of business. He was head of product. And then he went on to become the GM of education at Endeavor, the talent agency. So he'll be sharing some really interesting perspectives. So join us. And Seth, any last words that you want to leave with the community?
Yes, I've been waiting where everyone logs off. The answer is not Disco Inferno. It's from a group called Less is More. Would you like to disco? So we're going to go out on Would You Like to Disco? Thank you, Candace. Anyone who has a chance in Canada to get to Algonquin Park this summer, please go on my behalf. Keep making ruckus, everybody.
Thanks, Seth. Great to see you. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Woohoo! See you soon.